Daniel Carter pulled the brim of his faded Detroit Tigers cap low as he stepped through the automatic glass doors of the superstore. The hiss of the doors opening blended with the hum of fluorescent lights, a soundtrack he knew too well but had never expected to hear in disguise. Nobody looked twice at him. Not the teenage cashier chewing gum while scanning cereal boxes. Not the overweight security guard leaning lazily against his podium. Not even the floor manager barking orders at a stockboy. That was the point. Daniel wasn't here as the billionaire CEO of Carter Retail Group, the empire of discount department stores stretching across half the Midwest. He wasn't here as the man whose face graced the cover of Fortune last year. Today, he was simply Dan, a customer wandering into one of his own stores undercover. He had come for a reason. What he didn't know was that reason was about to find him first. The sound hit him like a punch soft at first, then unmistakable. Sobbing. Desperate, broken sobbing echoing off the tile corridor near the employee restrooms. Daniel froze, pulse quickening. The hallway was empty except for a silver rectangle glinting under the crack of a bathroom door. A name badge, Elena Ramirez, custodial staff. The crying inside wasn't just sadness. It was grief dragged across gravel. The kind of sound that only comes from a person watching their world collapse in slow motion. Daniel's breath caught. 3 months ago, he had read glowing reports about this location-perfect employee satisfaction scores. No complaints, strong sales. But the woman behind that door told a different story entirely. He stood there, torn between his role as an invisible observer and his humanity. Finally, he lifted a hand and knocked gently. "Excuse me, are you okay in there?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. He heard shuffling, a quick intake of breath, and then a shaky voice. I'm fine. Just give me a minute." But Daniel had heard too much in those 3 words. This wasn't fine. This was a woman balancing on the edge of despair. When the door finally opened, a petite Latina woman in her early 40s stepped out. Her custodial uniform was wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes swollen and red. She bent quickly to retrieve her name badge, but her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it again. "I'm sorry," she whispered without looking at him. "I shouldn't be here. I need to get back to work." Daniel studied her more closely. Her palms were raw and cracked, clearly burned from harsh cleaning chemicals. Deep shadows hung beneath her eyes, the kind that spoke of long nights and too little sleep. But what caught him most was the way she flinched at the sound of footsteps from the main floor, like a soldier expecting an attack. "You don't look fine," Daniel said softly. "I'm Dan. By the way, just started here today." Her eyes flickered to his face, searching. After a moment, her shoulders sagged. "It's just, everything's falling apart," she admitted. "My daughter, Sophia, she needs heart surgery. Her condition's getting worse, and I can't—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "You don't need to hear this." "How long have you worked here?" Daniel asked. 3 years. Never missed a day. Never been late. But lately?" She gestured toward the bulletin board at the end of the hall. Daniel followed her gaze. The schedule posted there was a mess of crossed-out shifts, arrows scribbled in pen, hours changed and changed again. Elena's name appeared erratically, 20 hours one week, 35 the next, then dropped to 15. No consistency. No way to plan a life. "They keep cutting my hours," Elena murmured, voice barely audible. "Mr. Collins says it's corporate policy, but I don't understand. The store is always busy. We're always short-staffed." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew the corporate scheduling rules full-time employees were guaranteed stable hours. This wasn't policy. This was sabotage. "And the health insurance?" Elena's voice cracked. "They told me I wasn't eligible because my hours were too irregular. But I've been here 3 years. I was supposed to qualify after 90 days. Daniel forced his face to remain neutral, though his stomach boiled. Someone had deliberately kept her below the threshold for benefits. Someone had condemned her child to suffer in order to save a few dollars on the balance sheet. "You're not the only one," Elena whispered, leaning closer. "Tommy in electronics, Sarah in cosmetics. We're all the same. Hours cut, benefits denied. And Mr. Collins says if we don't like it, plenty of people would be happy to take our jobs." A chill crept through Daniel's chest. Richard Collins, regional manager. On paper, his record was flawless. Lower labor costs, higher efficiency, no complaints. But now Daniel saw how those numbers were built. Fear, exploitation, lies. "Listen, Dan," Elena continued, her voice breaking. "I need this job. Sophia's only 8. Without the surgery—" Her words crumbled into silence. She pinned her name badge back onto her chest with shaking fingers. That small piece of plastic was all that stood between her daughter and disaster. "I should go," she whispered, glancing toward the sales floor. "My shift ends at 11, but I'm supposed to be back at 6 tomorrow for inventory. Mr. Collins scheduled me for a double, but the system only shows 8 hours of pay." Daniel's eyes followed her as she limped slightly down the hall, her gait stiff from years on concrete floors without proper shoes or mats. Another policy ignored, another life broken by negligence. He turned back to the schedule board. Each crossed-out shift represented a family struggling to buy groceries. Each arbitrary reduction in hours meant a parent choosing between rent and medicine. He thought of his boardroom speeches about values, about taking care of our people, and he realized those words had been nothing more than echoes in a tower of glass. On the floor of his own empire, his people were being crushed. For the first time in years, Daniel Carter felt ashamed of his own company. And then he felt something sharper: determination. This wasn't just about Elena Ramirez. This was about every worker trapped under the boot of Richard Collins and men like him. The question was, how deep did the rot go? The following morning, Daniel arrived early, still cloaked in his role as Dan, the new hire. From the break room, he watched Elena clock in at 6 a.m., her face pale but determined. She moved with the stiff grace of someone who knew her body couldn't afford mistakes. At 6:47, Richard Collins emerged from his office. Daniel recognized the type immediately mid-30s, hair slicked back with too much product, his manager's badge gleaming like a medal he hadn't earned. Collins' eyes swept the floor until they found Elena mopping near electronics. "Ramirez!" His voice cracked across the store like a whip. Elena froze, then slowly looked up, her expression carefully blank. "Yes, Mr. Collins? This floor's still filthy. What exactly have you been doing for the past hour?" Daniel looked down. The floor was spotless. He could see his reflection in the tiles, but Elena only nodded. "I'll go over it again." "You better," Collins smirked. "And maybe next time, try actually working instead of feeling sorry for yourself. Now get in my office. We need to talk." Daniel's hands clenched. He wanted to storm in, to end it right there. But if he intervened now, he'd never see the full scope of what Collins was doing. Through the glass wall of the office, he watched Elena stand silently while Collins lounged in his chair, radiating arrogance. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw her posture shrink with every sentence. A moment later, Tommy Nguyen from electronics slumped into the break room beside Daniel. "Poor Elena," he muttered. "Third time this week he's dragged her in there." "What's he saying to her?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone casual. Tommy's eyes darted nervously. "Same thing he says to all of us. We should be grateful for whatever hours we get. People like us don't get to complain. Immigrants, single moms, folks who can't afford to quit. He knows exactly who to push." Daniel glanced back through the glass just as Collins pulled out Elena's timesheet and began slashing through hours with a red pen. Elena's face crumpled. "He's cutting her time again," Tommy whispered bitterly, probably saying she took too many breaks. "Last week he docked Sarah 3 hours for bathroom usage. She's pregnant, Daniel slid his hand into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the voice recorder app. Colin's voice carried through the thin office wall. If you can't handle the workload without getting emotional, maybe this isn't the right job for you. Plenty of people would kill to have your position. Please, Mr. Collins. Elena's voice trembled. I just need consistent hours. My daughter, your personal problems aren't my concern. What concerns me is that you've been talking to other employees about scheduling. Sounds like troublemaking. Daniel hit record. I wasn't making trouble. I was just what? Organizing complaints? Because that would be very unfortunate for your employment here. Starting next week, you're down to 12 hours. Maybe that'll teach you to keep your mouth shut. Through the glass, Daniel saw Elena nod silently. Her dignity chipped away piece by piece. When she finally emerged, her face was pale but composed. She didn't look toward the break room. She didn't look at anyone. She just walked back to her mop, pinned in place by survival. But Daniel had what he needed. The recording in his pocket was a loaded gun, proof that beneath the glossy numbers, Carter Retail Group was rotting from within, and Richard Collins had just handed him the first nail for his own coffin. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the last customers trickled out of the superstore. The clock above the entrance ticked past 10:01 p.m., and the sliding doors finally locked shut with a metallic click. The air shifted, quieter now, almost claustrophobic. For most of Detroit, night meant rest. For the people left inside this building, it meant another battle to survive. Daniel Carter adjusted the strap of his second-hand work boots and tugged at the ill-fitting custodial shirt. The name tag pinned to his chest read, Dan Harper, a temporary hire with no resume and no leverage. His billion-dollar suit was miles away, replaced by bargain jeans and a callous disguise. He wheeled his cleaning cart out from the supply room, careful not to walk too confidently, careful not to reveal the man beneath the costume. This wasn't the boardroom. This was the floor. And tonight, he was here to live it. Elena Ramirez was already waiting near the janitorial closet, her face pale under the harsh lights. She gave him a wary glance as if unsure why this new hire had returned. You came back, she said quietly. Told you I needed the job, Daniel replied, softening his voice into the flat tone of a man who'd been beaten down by too many disappointments. Guess we're working together. Elena studied him for a long second, maybe sensing something different beneath the surface, but she only sighed and pushed a mop into his hands. Stick close to me tonight, she murmured. I'll show you the ropes. And Dan, everything I told you yesterday about being careful around Mr. Collins, double it for the night shift. That's when he does his worst. Her warning hung heavy in the air. By 11 p.m., the store had transformed. Gone were the bright smiles of daytime staff, the chatter of customers, the illusion of normalcy. In its place was the skeleton crew 2 janitors, one stock boy, and Collins prowling like a wolf guarding his territory. Elena guided Daniel through the rhythm of overnight custodial work. Restrooms first, then floors, then trash collection. She showed him how to stretch the last half-empty bottle of floor cleaner across an entire wing. How to reuse paper towels because the supply budget had been slashed to the bone. Why are you using the same mop water for the break room and the bathrooms? Daniel asked, wrinkling his nose at the acrid stench. Elena shot him a sharp look. Because Mr. Collins says we're wasting chemicals. We get 1 bottle of disinfectant for the whole week. She lifted the container, almost empty already. By Friday, it'll just be water. Daniel felt heat rising in his chest. Corporate allocated far more than this. Somewhere between the supply order and this closet, product was disappearing, or worse, being resold off the books. At 11:30, Richard Collins appeared. His footsteps echoed long before his shadow fell across the linoleum. He moved with that swagger Daniel had seen before, the calculated arrogance of a man who knew he could get away with anything. He found Elena crouched in the restroom, scrubbing grout with a worn brush. Ramirez, he barked. She stiffened, knuckles white on the handle. Yes, Mr. Collins? You're moving too slow. At this rate, we'll be here until sunrise. I'm working as fast as I can. Not fast enough. I'm docking 30 minutes from your time card. Collins pulled out his phone and typed a note, smirking as he did it. Daniel stood in the hall, jaw tight, forcing himself to stay in character. Every word was like watching money being stolen from her pocket in real time. $6 gone with a single keystroke. At 1:15 a.m., Collins returned with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He summoned both Elena and Daniel to the main aisle. Corporate's been writing me about labor costs, Collins announced, his voice dripping with false authority. So starting next week, we're implementing efficiency measures. Elena's face went pale. She already knew what was coming. Instead of 2 custodial workers on nights, we're going back to 1. Collins smiled like he was offering a promotion. Ramirez, you've been here longer. You keep the position, but you'll need to handle the entire workload by yourself in the same 8-hour shift. Daniel calculated quickly. What the two of them had done tonight was already beyond human endurance. Asking Elena to do it alone was physically impossible. Mr. Collins, Elena started carefully. This store is 45,000 square feet. One person can't. One person can and will. Collins cut her off. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to quit. I can find replacements tomorrow. The words landed like knives. Daniel watched Elena swallow her protest, her shoulders collapsing. She couldn't risk losing the job. Not with her daughter's surgery looming. After Collins left, she slumped against a checkout counter, her hands trembling. I can't do this whole store alone, she whispered. If you complain, you'll lose the job entirely. Daniel finished for her. She nodded, eyes glistening. Sophia's surgery is scheduled for next month. I need the insurance. If I say one wrong word, he'll make sure I never qualify. Daniel said nothing, but inside, his blood roared. An hour later, Daniel noticed something unusual. Collins's office door had been left slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. Inside, Collins sat hunched over his computer, typing rapidly. Can you handle the East Wing for a few minutes? Daniel asked Elena, forcing his voice casual. I'll catch up. She frowned. Be careful. If he catches you snooping, I'll just be taking out trash, he said with a quick smile. Pushing his cart slowly down the corridor, Daniel stopped near the supply closet adjacent to the office. From the crack in the door, the glow of Collins' monitor was visible. What Daniel saw made his breath hitch. Collins was logged into the scheduling system, reducing hours for multiple employees in real time. Maria's name slashed from 32 hours to 12. Tommy's cut from 25 to 15. Sarah, the pregnant cashier, docked again. But that wasn't the worst of it. Collins was reassigning those stolen hours to a phantom employee. R. Collins Jr., a name that didn't exist on the floor. Daniel realized instantly what was happening. Wage theft disguised as payroll. Collins was funneling money into a fake account, probably controlled by him or a relative. Daniel pulled out his phone and hit record, capturing every keystroke. Then, with a click of the mouse, Collins switched to the health insurance system. He pulled up Elena's file and changed her status from full-time eligible to part-time temporary. Just like that, her 3 years of service vanished, erased by a few keystrokes. Daniel's hands shook with rage. Elena's daughter's life reduced to an entry in a drop-down menu. At 3 a.m., Collins emerged from his office, whistling tunelessly, his expression smug. He spotted Daniel near the stockroom and barked, Harper, move all those pallets onto the floor by yourself. Daniel looked at the mountain of boxes, easily a 4-person job. All of them? Problem with that? Because I can find someone who doesn't give me attitude. Daniel forced a grin. No problem. The next 2 hours were hell. His back screamed. Sweat soaked his shirt, and his hands blistered from dragging heavy loads across concrete. But he pushed through, recording every demand, every insult. By 5:30, he'd gathered enough evidence to destroy Collins' career 10 times over. Wage theft, benefit fraud, unsafe conditions, workplace harassment, a masterclass in cruelty. But then something happened that turned Daniel's anger into fury. The office phone rang, two short bursts, one long again and again. Each time, Collins answered in hushed tones, speaking for 3 to 4 minutes before hanging up. Curiosity gnawed at Daniel. Finally, he positioned himself near the supply closet close enough to hear. "Miller here," Collins said into the phone. "Yeah, I got your numbers for this week. Ramirez down to 12 hours. Nguyen at 15, the pregnant one. Sarah, I'm putting her on inventory. She'll quit within a month." Daniel's blood ran cold. Collins wasn't just running this scheme alone. He was reporting to someone. No complaints filed, Collins continued smugly. "They're too scared. I've got fake performance reviews ready for all of them. Attitude problems, reliability issues. Corporate won't look twice." Daniel's phone recorded every word. Then Collins laughed, a low, ugly chuckle. "The Ramirez woman's perfect. Single mom, desperate for insurance. I could cut her to zero and she'd still crawl back. Her kid needs heart surgery. Makes her easy to control." Daniel's vision went red. Every instinct screamed to burst in and break Collins in half. But he forced himself to stay still, to let the recorder capture every drop of venom. "Don't worry about exposure," Collins added. "Who's going to believe them? A bunch of immigrants and high school dropouts against a regional manager with glowing reviews? Corporate will laugh them out of the building." The call ended with a soft click. Collins leaned back, smug and untouchable. But Daniel knew better. Tonight, the noose had tightened. Collins had given him the confession, the conspiracy, and the cruelty all in one recording. As dawn approached, Elena limped through the final cleaning tasks, her face pale, her hands trembling. She pressed a palm to her chest, wincing. "Elena, are you okay?" Daniel asked quietly. "Just tired." She tried to lift a bag of trash, but nearly dropped it. "Doctors cost money. My insurance never kicked in." Daniel caught the bag before it hit the floor. His throat tightened. This woman was breaking her body for a company that was actively killing her. At 6 wet sharp, Collins strutted from his office with a stack of papers. "Good work tonight. People, Ramirez, back at 2 this afternoon for inventory. Harper, I'll let you know if there are more shifts. Keep your head down. You'll do fine." He whistled as he left, oblivious to the storm gathering above his head. Daniel watched Elena hobble to her car, exhaustion weighing her down. She would be back in 8 hours, ready to take more abuse because she had no choice. But Daniel Carter did have a choice, and after tonight, he had everything he needed. The smoking gun was loaded. Tomorrow, he would pull the trigger. The morning sun bled through the thin curtains of Daniel Carter's budget hotel room. He hadn't slept. The recordings on his phone had replayed through the night. Collins's smug laughter seared into his brain. Every word was a blade. Wage theft, benefit fraud, threats, and worst of all, mocking Elena's daughter's failing heart as leverage. Daniel sat at the small desk, his laptop open, spreadsheets scattered across the screen. The official employee records painted one picture. Turnover down, efficiency up, labor costs slashed. But when he cross-referenced with Collins' scheduling logs, the truth emerged. Hundreds of stolen hours, dozens of manipulated insurance statuses, a parade of lives systematically stripped of security. He closed the laptop and leaned back. Rage tightened his chest, but beneath it was something heavier. Guilt. This was his company, his empire. Collins hadn't invented the cracks in the system. Daniel had built them by focusing on margins and ignoring the ground floor. Collins had simply crawled through those cracks like a rat. The time for observation was over. Tonight, Daniel would act. But first, he needed more than recordings. He needed a stage. a moment so public that Collins couldn't wriggle free. By afternoon, Daniel returned to the store as Dan Harper, the desperate new hire. The harsh fluorescent lights felt different now, charged with the knowledge of what was coming. He found Elena in the break room, sitting alone at a table with a peanut butter sandwich. She was trying to eat, but her hand shook so badly the bread crumbled in her grip. "You sure you're okay?" Daniel asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Elena forced a smile. "Just need to get through today. Sophia's surgery got moved up to next week. I can't afford to lose another hour." The words stabbed Daniel deeper than any boardroom critique ever had. Before he could reply, the break room door swung open. Collins strutted in, clipboard under his arm, his eyes sharp as glass. "Inventory training, everyone. Front of store. Now." A dozen employees shuffled out of their corners. Tommy from electronics, Sarah with her swollen belly, a handful of others whose faces bore the same weary resignation. Daniel followed, slipping into the semicircle as Collins raised his voice. "Corporate's been breathing down my neck about inventory," Collins announced, pacing like a drill sergeant. "So here's the new policy. Any discrepancies come out of your paychecks. Lost merchandise, miscounts, damaged goods, it all gets deducted from your wages." A ripple of disbelief ran through the group. Tommy's jaw dropped. Sarah pressed a hand to her belly protectively. Elena stared at the floor, jaw tight. Collins' eyes found her. "I know some of you might think this is unfair, but maybe if certain people paid more attention to their work instead of personal problems, we wouldn't need these measures." The direct attack was a blade across her dignity. Daniel felt something in him snap. He stepped forward from the back of the crowd. "Actually, Mr. Collins, I think what's unfair here isn't what you're pointing at." Collins' head jerked up. "Harper, you got something to say?" Daniel met his eyes, calm but unflinching. "Yeah, I've got a lot to say." He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped play. Collins' voice filled the space, dripping venom. "The Ramirez woman's perfect. Single mom, desperate for insurance. I could cut her to zero, and she'd still crawl back. Her kid needs heart surgery, makes her easy to control." The effect was instant. The employees froze, eyes wide, mouths open. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah gasped audibly. Murmurs rose, sharp with anger. Collins went pale. "What the hell is this?" Daniel's voice cut steady as steel. "That's you, last night at 5:30 a.m., bragging about how you steal wages, deny benefits, and exploit your workers." "You recorded me illegally," Collins spat, his voice cracking with panic. "Michigan's a one-party consent state," Daniel replied evenly. "Perfectly legal. And wage theft, benefit fraud, conspiracy, those are federal crimes." Collins' eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. "You don't know who you're messing with. I'll have you arrested. I'll—" Daniel reached into his other pocket. A gold badge gleamed in the fluorescent light. "CEO, Carter Retail Group." The break room went silent. "My name isn't Dan Harper," Daniel said, his voice carrying through the store. "It's Daniel Carter. I own this company. And Richard Collins. You're finished." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Employees stared at Daniel, at Collins, at the unfolding theater. You can't do this," Collins stammered, his face mottled with rage. "I've got a contract." "You had a contract," Daniel corrected coldly. "Fraud voids everything." Two security officers entered, men Daniel had positioned outside hours earlier. They flanked Collins, who suddenly looked much smaller without his swagger. "You're terminated effective immediately," Daniel declared. "You'll also be facing a full investigation for wage theft, benefit fraud, and conspiracy." Collins thrashed like a trapped animal. "You can't prove anything. It's their word against mine." He pointed at the employees, sneering. Who's going to believe a bunch of immigrants and dropouts against me? Daniel stepped closer, eyes like iron. I don't need their word. I have your own confession, computer logs, screenshots, recordings, a paper trail of every life you tried to crush. And one more thing. Collins, I have the power you pretended to wield. Real power, the kind that comes from truth. Collins' knees buckled as the security officers took his arms. His last words, muttered bitterly, were drowned out by the collective sound of employees exhaling the breath they'd been holding for years. When the doors shut behind Collins, silence remained. 15 employees stood in a circle, staring at their CEO, the disguise gone, the truth blazing. Elena was the first to speak, her voice trembling. You're really the owner? Daniel nodded. I am, and I owe you all an apology. I built this company on the principle that we take care of our people. But I failed you. I was so focused on numbers. I lost sight of lives. Tommy stepped forward, eyes wary. So what happens now? We all get fired for talking to you? The question hit like a knife. These people had been conditioned to expect punishment for honesty. No one's getting fired, Daniel said firmly. In fact, we're going to fix everything Collins broke. Starting now. Within 20 minutes, Rebecca Lou Carter Retail Group's head of HR arrived with a small team and a stack of laptops. Daniel trusted her more than any other executive. She'd built her career on fighting for fairness inside corporations. Emergency audit, Daniel ordered. Every employee file Collins touched. Restore every stolen hour, every denied benefit, back pay, retroactive coverage, make it right. The break room became a war room. Rebecca's team typed furiously. Employees summoned one by one. Elena Ramirez, Rebecca called. 3 years of service? Yes, Elena whispered, eyes wary. According to Collins, you're part-time temporary, but the actual hours show you've been full-time for 34 months. Rebecca's fingers danced. Effective immediately. You're full-time permanent, full health coverage, retroactive, and you're owed $1,500 in stolen wages. The check will be cut within 48 hours. Elena's knees buckled. Daniel caught her as tears spilled down her cheeks. My daughter's surgery, she whispered. Fully covered, Rebecca assured her. Pre-authorization will be processed today. A sob tore from Elena's throat, part relief, part disbelief. Around the room, other employees were hearing similar news. Back pay, restored hours, maternity leave granted. Years of stolen dignity returned in keystrokes. But Daniel wasn't finished. He stood before them all, his voice carrying the weight of authority and humility. What happened here will never happen again. Not in this store, not in this company. His eyes found Sarah, who sat with a protective hand on her belly. Sarah, how far along are you? 7 months, she said quietly. Effective immediately. You're on paid leave until after your maternity ends. Full salary, full benefits. Guaranteed position when you return. Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time in months, she looked safe. Daniel turned to Tommy. You've worked every department in this store. You care about your people. How would you feel about assistant manager? Tommy dropped his clipboard. Sir, I don't have a degree. You have something better. You understand what leadership means? The job's yours. But it was Elena who received the biggest shock. Daniel faced her directly. Elena Ramirez, I have an offer for you. Store manager. The room froze. Even Rebecca's typing stopped. Sir, I clean floors. Elena stammered. You've been managing the impossible for 3 years, Daniel said firmly. You know this store, these people, and what it means to survive. Managing a store will be easier by comparison. Training, courses, support, it's all yours. Starting salary, $65,000 plus benefits, with bonuses tied to employee satisfaction. Elena's hands shook. 65,000. That's just the start, Daniel said. Good managers rise higher, but what matters is this. You've earned it. For the first time, Elena lifted her chin, not in fear, but in pride. By nightfall, the store buzzed with a new energy. Employees who had walked in broken now whispered excitedly, comparing restored wages and benefits. For the first time in years, hope replaced fear. Daniel slipped outside, the cool air washing over him. He glanced back at the glowing sign of Carter Retail. From the outside, it looked unchanged, but inside, everything was different. And tomorrow, the real battle company-wide reform would begin. 3 days had passed since Richard Collins had been escorted out of the store in handcuffs. The employees still spoke about it in hushed tones, like recalling a nightmare that might return if they spoke too loudly. The echoes of his threats hadn't vanished overnight. Fear, after all, lingers longer than cruelty. Daniel Carter knew this. That was why he was back at the Detroit store. Not in a private jet to New York or a boardroom in Chicago. This was ground zero. If reform was going to stick, it had to start here. It began in the break room. The same space that had once been a place of whispered dread now hummed with the cautious energy of a group meeting. A whiteboard stood at the front of the room, markers lined neatly in a tray. Daniel leaned against the counter, dressed simply in a plain button-down and slacks, his CEO badge left in his pocket. "Elena, this is your meeting," he said softly. "Take it." Elena Ramirez stood at the front, wearing clothes that still looked foreign to her khakis. A blouse Rebecca had bought her as a first gesture of her new position. Her name tag now read Store Manager. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she began. "Okay, thank you all for being here. I know the last week's been," she searched for a word, "heavy, but this is our chance to rebuild together." She uncapped a marker and wrote across the board, "Employee Council." "This isn't my idea," she said, glancing at Daniel. "It's ours. From now on, this store will have an elected council of workers, cashiers, stockers, janitors, anyone can serve. You'll have a direct line to me, and through me, to corporate. No more whispering in bathrooms. No more fear of retaliation." A ripple ran through the room. Tommy Nguyen raised his hand. "So, if Collins ever tries to come back, or if someone like him gets hired again, we stop it before it starts," Elena said firmly. Her voice carried more authority now, not borrowed from Daniel, but earned in the fire of her own survival. Sarah, still heavily pregnant, shifted in her chair. "And if corporate pushes back," Daniel finally spoke, "corporate is me. And I'm here telling you, this is policy now. Not just for this store company-wide. Every location will have a council." The room fell quiet. Employees exchanged looks. For the first time in years, the promise felt real. By afternoon, yet the changes were visible on the floor. Where Collins' chaotic schedules had once loomed like a punishment board, a new clean chart hung, hours assigned consistently, requests honored, overtime logged properly. Elena insisted every schedule be posted 2 weeks in advance. Tommy, wearing his new assistant manager badge, moved through the aisles with the nervous excitement of someone finding his footing. He stopped beside 2 teenage cashiers. "Hey, don't rush the scanning," he advised. "Take your time. Customers prefer accuracy, and if anyone complains, send them to me." The teens nodded, visibly relieved. Under Collins, mistakes had meant humiliation. Under Tommy, mistakes meant learning. Sarah had been placed on modified duty until her maternity leave began. No more lifting boxes or standing for hours. Instead, she managed customer feedback forms at the service desk, a task she'd designed herself. "People actually like filling these out," she told Elena, holding a stack of completed surveys. "Turns out customers want to say nice things when they're not afraid their words will be twisted." Elena smiled. "That's because they can see we're smiling too." But not everything was easy. Late that evening, Daniel walked past the stockroom and overheard 2 employees whispering, "You think this'll last?" one asked. Maybe until the cameras go away, the other muttered. Then it'll be back to business as usual. Daniel paused, his chest tightening. This was the true test, not changing policies, but changing belief. Trust was fragile, and fear had left scars too deep to erase with a single speech. The next morning, he convened another meeting. This time, he spoke first. I know some of you don't believe this is real. That's fair. You've been burned. You've been lied to. Collins taught you not to trust leadership, and I let that happen by staying too far away. He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. So I won't ask you to trust me today. I'll ask you to watch. Watch what we do in the next weeks, months, years. Let the proof earn your trust back. There was silence. Then Elena stepped forward. He's right. I didn't believe it either. 3 weeks ago, I was crying in a bathroom, convinced I had no power. Today, I'm standing here as your manager. If it can happen for me, it can happen for all of us. The words struck like lightning. Murmurs of agreement rippled, hesitant but real. The transformation was slow, but visible. By week 2, productivity had risen, not from fear, but from initiative. Employees suggested ideas, cross-training between departments, more efficient stocking routes, even a break room redesign. Elena approved most of them. By week 3, customer satisfaction scores spiked. Shoppers noticed the difference immediately. Clerks smiled genuinely. Shelves were neatly stocked. Checkout lines moved smoothly. And by week 4, the once toxic store had become something unrecognizable, a place people wanted to work. One evening, Daniel sat in Elena's new office, the same room where Collins had once slashed hours with a red pen. Now, the desk held spreadsheets of employee projects, a vase of fresh flowers, and a photo of Sophia smiling after her surgery. How's she doing? Daniel asked gently. Elena's whole face lit up. Running around the yard like she's been waiting her whole life. Doctors say her heart is stronger than ever. Daniel felt something unclench in his chest. For all the millions he'd earned, no achievement felt heavier than those words. And you? He asked. Elena looked around the office. I still feel like an imposter sometimes, but when I see Tommy coaching the new kids, or Sarah planning her leave without fear, I realize this is what leadership should feel like. Not power, responsibility. Daniel smiled faintly. You sound like a CEO already. The ripple effect began to spread beyond Detroit. Reports came in from other stores, employees emboldened by what they'd heard, whisper networks turning into open councils. Rebecca's HR team was swamped with audits, uncovering similar abuses hidden under glowing numbers. Each time, Daniel demanded the same response: restitution, reform, accountability. Some managers resigned, others were fired, a few fought back, but the tide had turned. Employees across the company were finally speaking, and this time someone was listening. But with progress came resistance. 2 weeks later, Daniel sat in a board meeting in Chicago. The executives, all suits and polished shoes, looked uneasy. Daniel, you've made your point, one vice president said cautiously. But these reforms are expensive. Restoring back pay, adding benefits, councils, it all eats into margins. Shareholders are starting to ask questions. Daniel leaned forward, his voice even. Then tell the shareholders the truth. If we don't take care of our people, there won't be a company to invest in. Fear creates turnover. Turnover creates inefficiency. Inefficiency destroys profit. Do you want short-term gains or long-term survival? Murmurs, frowns, but no rebuttal. He pressed on. If Collins taught us anything, it's that cutting costs by cutting lives isn't efficiency, it's rot. And I will not build my empire on rot. And no wonder now, the silence that followed was the kind that shifts futures. Back in Detroit, Elena called her first official employee council meeting. 10 workers sat around the break room table, Stockers, cashiers, janitors, part-timers, full-timers, each elected by their peers. Tommy took notes diligently. Sarah, on leave, dialed in by video, her newborn cradled in her arms. The agenda was simple. What needed fixing next? Ideas poured out, better scheduling transparency, fairer promotion opportunities, safer equipment, even a picnic to celebrate the end of Colin's reign. Elena listened to each, writing them on the board. When the list filled, she looked around the table. "This is how we'll build the future," she said. "Not top-down, side by side." The council members nodded. For the first time, power in the store belonged to the many, not the one. That night, as Daniel prepared to leave, Tommy stopped him at the door. "Mr. Carter," he said, hesitating, "when Collins was here, I used to dream about quitting, about finding a job where I wasn't treated like dirt. But now, I don't want to leave. I want to stay and build this with Elena." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly what I hoped to hear." Later, in his hotel room, Daniel reflected. The hardest battles weren't the ones fought in boardrooms or conferences. They were fought here, in break rooms that smelled of coffee and bleach, among people who had been told their voices didn't matter. Now, those voices were shaping the company. Tomorrow, he knew, the challenge would grow. Other regions, other managers, other Collinses lurking in the shadows. But tonight, one store in Detroit had proven the impossible. Fear had turned into courage. Silence had turned into laughter. A janitor had become a manager. And Daniel Carter had remembered what leadership truly meant. 6 months after Richard Collins was dragged out of the Detroit superstore, the world of Carter retail looked unrecognizable. The numbers told one story. Employee turnover down by 42%, customer satisfaction at record highs, profits rising instead of falling despite the reforms. But the real story lived in the voices of people who had once been silent. It started with Elena Ramirez. On a crisp October morning, she stood on a stage at company headquarters in Chicago, wearing a blazer instead of a janitorial uniform, her voice steady as she addressed 300 store managers. "6 months ago, I was scrubbing floors at night, terrified to speak," she told them. "I thought leadership meant fear. That's what Collins taught us. But then I realized leadership isn't about power over people. It's about responsibility for people. If we forget that, we've lost everything." Swornana, the room erupted in applause. Daniel Carter, watching from the front row, felt his chest tighten. Elena wasn't just speaking for Detroit anymore. She was speaking for every employee who'd ever been silenced. Afterward, managers crowded her with questions. Not about profits or efficiency, but about dignity, about trust, about how to rebuild after years of neglect. Elena answered each patiently, her confidence blooming like something inevitable. Back in Detroit, the changes had become part of daily life. Tommy Nguyen now wore a crisp polo embroidered with assistant manager. He spent his days training new hires, his nights studying management courses Daniel had arranged. His natural leadership turned the electronics department into a model of teamwork. Sarah, glowing with new motherhood, returned from leave without fear of replacement. She set up a family room near customer service for nursing mothers, something unheard of in retail before. Customers noticed, spreading word online. Carter Retail became known as the store that cares. The break room, once a tomb of whispered complaints, now displayed a mural painted by employees. It showed a rising sun over a skyline of stores, with the words, "Voices matter here." But with progress came resistance beyond the company. By winter, journalists had picked up the story. Headlines spread, "CEO goes undercover, exposes wage theft." Labor groups invited Daniel and Elena to conferences. Competitors bristled, some calling it a stunt, others quietly adjusting their own policies to keep up. One evening, as snow drifted across Detroit, Daniel sat in Elena's office, reviewing reports. "You realize you've become the face of this?" "Not me," he said with a wry smile. Elena laughed softly. I'm still getting used to the idea that anyone wants to hear me talk. For years, Collins made me feel invisible. Now people are listening. They're not just listening, Daniel said. They're following. She grew serious. Daniel, what if this isn't just a Carter retail problem? I've been talking to workers at other chains. They tell me the same stories. Cut hours, stolen wages, retaliation. What if there's a whole system built on silence? Daniel leaned back, thoughtful. Then maybe we tear down the system. 2 months later, they unveiled the Worker-Verified Fair Employment Certification. It was Elena's idea. A seal of approval stores could earn only if employees themselves confirm fair treatment through anonymous surveys and surprise audits. No self-reporting, no corporate spin, truth measured at the ground level. The first Carter stores earned the certification quickly. Customers noticed. Sales rose. Competitors couldn't ignore it. Within a year, 5 other major retailers signed on. For the first time in decades, the balance of power in the retail industry began to tilt, not toward executives, but toward workers. The turning point came at the National Retail Federation's annual conference. Daniel Carter was the keynote speaker, but when he stepped on stage, he didn't start with a chart or a slogan. He started with a story. Last year, he told the hushed auditorium, I walked into one of my own stores pretending to be a janitor. I thought I'd find efficiency problems or maybe customer service issues. Instead, I heard someone crying in a bathroom. That cry changed everything. Chiare. He clicked to the next slide. A photo of Elena in her old uniform appeared on the massive screen. Gasps rippled through the crowd. That's Elena Ramirez. 3 years she worked full-time hours without benefits, denied health coverage while her daughter's heart failed, not because of policy, but because a manager knew how to exploit the cracks in our system. He clicked again. A photo of Elena, now store manager, confident, leading her council. Today, Elena runs one of our highest performing stores, employee satisfaction, 94%, customer ratings, up 47%, profits, up 23%. Because when you treat people right, everything else follows. The audience erupted in applause, but Daniel raised a hand. This isn't just about Carter Retail. It's about every company, every leader, every person with power. Somewhere in your business, someone is crying in a bathroom right now, waiting for you to notice. The question is, will you? When he finished, he called Elena onto the stage. She stood beside him, scanning the sea of executives and cameras. Her hands trembled for a moment, then steadied. My daughter Sophia had her surgery last year, she said, her voice carrying. She's healthy now, running, playing, laughing. But what saved her wasn't just the doctors. It was a company that finally decided to listen. Listening saved my daughter's life, and it can save your employees too. The ovation was thunderous. Not polite applause, but the kind that shakes walls. The movement spread. Within months, over a dozen national retailers signed on to the certification. Federal investigators launched wage theft probes inspired by Carter Retail's disclosures. Labor laws were strengthened. Millions in stolen wages were restored nationwide. And through it all, Elena became a symbol not of victimhood, but of resilience. She gave interviews, mentored new council leaders, even traveled to Washington to testify before Congress. One night, after a long day of meetings, she called Daniel. Do you ever feel like this is bigger than us? She asked. Daniel chuckled. It was always bigger than us. We just happened to be the ones who listened first. Back in Detroit, the store stood as a living monument to change. The bulletin board now displayed schedules. Yes, but also birthday announcements. Employee of the month chosen by peers. Even snapshots from the company picnic. Sophia, now with a healthy heart, often visited, proudly pointing to her mother's office. That's my mom's desk, she told anyone who would listen. She's the boss. Employees laughed freely now. Customers noticed. The atmosphere that had once been suffocating had become light. One afternoon, Tommy handed Daniel a framed photo. It showed the entire staff gathered under the mural in the break room, smiling wide, holding a plaque they'd made themselves. Best place to work, voted by us. Daniel felt his throat tighten. No award from Wall Street could match this. 6 months later, Elena introduced Daniel at another conference. Her words were simple but cut to the core. Leaders aren't made in boardrooms. They're made when someone knocks on a bathroom door and asks, "Are you okay?" That's what Daniel did for me. And because of that, we're building a world where no one has to cry in silence at work ever again. The standing ovation was immediate, unanimous. Daniel stood beside her, humbled. He knew now that true leadership wasn't about empire or profit. It was about listening when it mattered most. That night, as he looked out over the Chicago skyline, Daniel reflected on the journey. He had set out to investigate a rumor. Instead, he had uncovered the soul of his company. The whisper of a single woman in a bathroom had become a movement shaking an entire industry, and he knew this was only the beginning. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Somewhere, right now, a worker is crying in silence, waiting for someone to care. Share this video so more people hear it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and hope. Together, we can build a world where every voice matters.